Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Alpha's Scarlet Secret. Episode 9. Chapter 71. Night had fallen, but the Alpha mansion of the Desert Storm Pack was ablaze with lights. They had moved everyone out of the appalling pack house, most of who were Omegas, placing the severely injured into the pack hospital, and those who had any healthcare knowledge were taking care of them. A few doctors from Raphael's pack and another neighboring pack had come to assist. The neighboring pack was indeed happy to hear Zidane was gone. They only came to assist after hearing what had happened and to see who the new Alpha was. They had gathered their dead and Raphael had bid them farewell, taking his men and the bodies of his lost pack members with him, knowing their mates and families were waiting for them. Scarlet had apologized once more for the loss he had suffered, knowing she would never be able to face their mates who had to go through so much. She now wrapped her arms around herself. Even in the soft fleecy top she wore, it was chilly. She walked over to the table where Aaron and Elijah were discussing something in the garden of the mansion. 11 from the Silver Fang Pack and 29 from the Crimson Moon Pack. Elijah was saying, a deep frown on his face. Raphael lost 15, and we lost 45. Aaron said, sighing deeply. Both men looked up as Scarlet approached, the cold wind blowing around them, but all the rooms were occupied. Resorting to discussing this outside was best. Elijah pulled her close, kissing her lips softly before hugging her tightly. In total, how many dead combined? She asked. 143, Aaron said, his eyes shadowed. Zidane also killed 93 of his own pack before he left. About 40 might not make it and another few hundred are on the mend. Elijah added. And those who cited him 70 are in the cells, about 380 are dead, but we're not 100% sure on that number. Those are the ones that the lead warrior here said are accountable for. Alejandro went wild. One of our wolves said the way he killed those women was as if he was enjoying every minute of it, and in that mess, there was definitely near 130 bodies. Aaron said, making Scarlet shiver remembering that sight. If he hadn't, we would have probably lost more, Elijah said, frowning deeply. Try not mentioning Alejandro to anyone. I don't know what Raphael's hiding, but we owe him that much. Aaron and Scarlet nodded. How's Monica? She asked Aaron as he began folding up the lists he had made. It was clear they had listed everyone who had died. Relieved that it's over and you're safe, he said. Alpha Scarlet, someone said. Being called Alpha was something Scarlet still found weird to hear. She turned to see Michael, the lead warrior. He was the highest in rank who had cited them and in a way was now the spokesperson for the rest of the pack, a lot of whom were cautious of Scarlet. Candice was in critical condition. Apparently, the wolf's bane was so strong it had affected her internal organs. However, she had told them it was Cade who she had made the mistake of talking to. It had been a dire mistake and he had told Zidane. Scarlet had considered putting the pack members who knew of the attack under Alpha command to ask if anyone else had betrayed them, but had decided to let it go. They also didn't know how he knew about what car Scarlet had been in. Michael, Scarlet said, stepping away from Elijah. Is everything okay? We were wondering what you wanted to do. There are rumors you're Alpha Elijah's mate and he has a pack too. Michael said, lowering his head to them. Elijah tensed. It was something he too had wondered. Although he had said they could combine packs or come up with something, he wasn't sure what Scarlet would decide on, and they also needed to return, although the bodies had been sent back. He did want to be there for their funerals. First off, Michael, look me in the eye when you talk, stop bowing. Scarlet said, frowning. As for that, I will be holding a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., those who can make it, gather them. As for the rest, I will keep the mind link open and make sure everyone can hear me. Thank you, Alpha. He replied, about to bow but stopped remembering her words and walked off. Well, it's best we turn in too, Aaron said tiredly. Scarlet nodded as she and Elijah headed inside. The house still made shivers run down her spine, and she remembered all the horrible things Zidane had done here. She stopped in her tracks, something coming to mind, and looked at Elijah. Head to the room we stayed in last time. I just need to do something, I'll see you there soon, she said. He frowned watching her, but she simply gave him a tender kiss before she walked away. Elijah watched until she was out of sight but didn't follow and headed upstairs, although he knew he wouldn't be able to relax until she was in his arms. Scarlet left the mansion, her heart thudding as she looked towards the garage that sat alone away from the mansion. It loomed eerily at her, bringing back haunting memories. Casting a swift glance around, she walked towards it, hoping her blocks were up, not wanting Elijah to feel the emotions that were threatening to drown her. Deep breaths, she told herself as she entered the garage, walking past the flashy cars and to the room at the back. She knew the code, she had seen it countless times. Pressing the buttons, she wondered if it was still the same. The door clicked and she pushed it open, switching on the weak white light, her heart thudding when she saw the state it was in. Dust coated the room, the walls had claw marks dug deep into the metal sheets of the wall, and everything was broken. The only thing whole was the blood-stained table that still stood in the center. Memories of the torture she suffered down here swirled around her, and she had to remind herself he was gone. She frowned seeing the papers and photographs that littered the floor. Her blood ran cold realizing they were images of herself as a child, blurred pictures taken from the CCTV around this very pack. She would never know why he had been so infatuated with abusing her. Her eyes fell to the wall on the same side as the door and she gasped. There on the wall was a huge map of England. String and red crosses were littered everywhere. There was a picture of her mother to the side and a drawing of how she would look growing up. Her heart thudded at the image. It was similar but still different from her. The fact her father had put effort into finding her was clear, and that scared her. She remembered long ago how Jackson had pulled strings to keep Scarlet and Indigo's identities a secret, so they didn't come up on the system. Going to a school which he was a strong financial supporter at had helped. She looked around the room of her nightmare for the last time. She opened one of the top drawers, remembering where he would usually keep a lighter, and looked around for something she could use. She stepped back out into the garage. Picking up an oil can, she returned to the room and began tossing the oil across the room and wall. It wouldn't burn it entirely, but she didn't want to cause a full-on fire either. The metal walls would keep most of the fire in here. Once she had emptied the can of oil, she tossed it down and picked up the lighter she had found, and flicking it on, tossed it towards the table that stood in the center, now splattered in oil. Watching as it caught ablaze, the fire spread quickly, and Scarlet smiled gravely. She was done with Zidane in every way. She turned and shut the door, trapping the spreading flames within. She didn't really care if the entire garage went up in flames, it stood alone anyway. She saw Michael and motioned him over. PVE burnt a room at the back, move the cars out. I guess we can sell them off. Don't put the fire out, but just make sure it stays contained. Yes, Alpha. He said. She gave a small nod before heading back inside. Elijah watched from the window upstairs, knowing exactly where she had gone. He had felt her raise the block on her emotions, but even then, he had felt the anxiety seeping through. The bedroom door opened, and he walked over to her, pulling her into his arms. She wrapped her arm around his waist, holding him tightly. He's gone, all of this is over. He whispered into her ear. Her heart thudded and she let herself go, taking in a shuddering breath as her emotions flooded him. Her pain, fear, sadness, regret, relief and guilt. Elijah led her to the bed. Sitting down, he lifted her onto his lap. It's going to be okay, kitten. He said quietly. She looked up into his eyes, now wrapping her arm around his shoulders, the other cupping his neck as she pulled him down, kissing him passionately. Pleasure coursing through her as her hands traveling down his chest. Red, he murmured. I want you. She whispered, turning in his lap to straddle him. He looked into her eyes, knowing she wanted a distraction from the pain she felt. He tugged her close by the back of her hair, kissing her harder. If this was the way she would feel better, then he was willing to give it to her. Their kisses became hotter, more desperate. Their hands roaming the other's body, the feeling of the other's skin and heat helping ease the pain that went through them, and above all, the relief that they were there together and safe. The following day came before Scarlet was even prepared for it. Breakfast was over and everyone was going to gather at the training grounds. Scarlet and Elijah were the first ones there. Just being here left a bitter taste in her mouth, the memories were hard to swallow, and she couldn't wait to get out of here. Relax, kitten, Elijah said, rubbing her arms, sensing her emotions. She closed her eyes and sighed. They will be here soon, and I don't know if they'll be willing. Willing for what? Care to share your plan? He asked quietly. Scarlet opened her eyes, realizing he hadn't once asked her what she wanted to do or press sunrised her into combining packs. In her emotional state last night, she had forgotten to even discuss it with him. Sorry, things have been crazy. I forgot to even ask you. She said, leaning into his chest. I want to ask the pack to combine with yours. If that's okay, of course. Zidane had businesses that are mine and Indigo's now. If we sell this land, the mansion, the cars, and other assets, we can construct more houses down that side. There's a lot of empty lands that we can buy near our pack grounds. I am sure many would love to move to a new location for a fresh start. And those who don't, we can give them a choice to settle in another pack and we can help them settle there. She now looked up at him, wondering what he thought. Her breath hitched in her throat when she saw the strong emotions clouding in his eyes. Yeah, that's perfect. He said softly, hugging her tighter. She closed her eyes, relieved. She could hear his thumping heart and knew he had been scared she'd want to stay here. But also, didn't want to tell her what to do. As an alpha, she knew how he loved control, but for her, he kept himself in check. Allowing her to make her own decisions, it was one of the things she loved about him. I love you, handsome. She said, reaching up, he bent down, their lips meeting in a kiss, sending rivets of pleasure rush through them both, the sizzling sparks of pleasure every time they touched. The sound of footsteps made them part and Elijah gripped her hips, pulling her against his front. "Stay close," he said, smirking. She bit her lip, thinking he was so distracting. "Then you better behave," she said, giving him a glare. "I'll try," he said as the first pack members began to approach. They could smell the fear, anxiety, and uncertainty radiating off them. Scarlet felt her gut twist with guilt at the way they looked at her in fear. These people needed help long ago, she only wished she had been able to do something sooner. She smiled at a few children who simply kept their heads lowered. The only ones who dared to look up at her were the Omega children she had ran into on her last visit. Their eyes were wide as they looked at her curiously, despite their mothers holding on to them tightly. Scarlet waved at them and motioned them over. Not missing the fear in their mother's eyes, although they instantly let the kids go. The boy and girl came over as the boy looked at Elijah. "Hi, mister," he said. "Hey kid, I didn't get your name last time." "Jace," he said. "And Phoebe." "Nice name," Elijah said as Phoebe looked at Scarlet. "Are you our new alpha?" she asked curiously. "Yes, I am, and I will make sure no one can hurt you anymore, okay?" she said. The two exchanged looks. "I told Mom she's cool," Jace whispered to the girl. He didn't seem to know those around could hear him. "Well, I'll let you two go back to your mothers and I'll get this meeting started," Scarlet said, standing up straight from where she had been crouching. She saw a few members of Elijah's pack around the side. "Thank you for showing up. I know things haven't been the best around here, but they won't be continuing this way. This pack has lost near enough a third of its number over the last few days. Yes, we fought some of this pack's members, but it was to protect ourselves and this pack. I know some of you lost mates, brothers, fathers, but it was unavoidable," Scarlet said, slipping her hands into the back pockets of her pants. Elijah's gaze fell to her but forced himself to look away. She was in front of her pack and deserved respect. But was it hard to keep his eyes off her? He thought. "This place is nothing but dark memories for me. I cannot take care of my pack when simply being here makes me sick to my stomach. Also, you may know that my mate is an alpha, so I have decided with his complete go-ahead to combine our packs, which means moving down south," Scarlet said, hearing the ripple spread through the crowd. Those who had not made it could hear her through her open mind link. Reaching out to all her members, those below 18 and were injured were the only ones who didn't know what was happening, and she hoped someone around them would be filling them in. "I won't force anyone to join if they don't wish to, instead you can move to a neighboring pack or to any of our allied packs. We can get you all settled where you are happy. But if you're interested in joining our pack, the Blood Moon, then let me know. I can tell you exactly what we plan to do. How to settle you all in. As well as how the pack is run. I was hurt along with my mother and sister when we left this pack. It was the Blood Moon pack who took us in, despite knowing the risks it could bring to them. They are a pack half the size of this one but have a huge heart and are strong," Scarlet said, now looking across the groups. "If anyone wants to ask anything, you're welcome to," she finished, glancing at Elijah. He gave her a thumbs up and she felt relieved. "Anyone? Well, while you guys think about it, I'll tell you a little about our pack. Aaron the projector. Elijah said, seeing no one spoke. Scarlet was glad he had thought of this idea. Watching as he began telling the group about how the pack was run. Training and how even Omegas could learn to if they wanted. Omegas were paid for their work and were treated with respect. The pack was diverse, and everyone was respected for who they are. The slideshow showed the pack house, the rest of the land, the mansion and the playing area, the small shops and the small restaurant that was on pack grounds. Scarlet could see many wolves seemed to be getting excited about it. She admired Elijah, he was a natural at this, he would indeed make an impressive alpha. He was explaining about schooling and how all the kids would go. The rules they expect and how everyone worked and lived independent lives to an extent. Not being bound to completely live under the rules and beck and call of the alpha. Once he was done, he looked at Scarlet who was watching him with a small smile on her face feeling proud of the man he had become. I'm impressed Alpha Westwood, she said through the mind link. After everything I've shown you, I'm capable of, you're impressed by this? Surely there must be something else that impresses you more. He replied smirking. Scarlet rolled her eyes. You will always be a crazy, she said back through the link, trying not to melt under that gaze. One you want right now, came his reply. She gave him a mock frown and turned to the people. Does anyone have any questions? I think the Alpha explained it well. But, why are you being so good to us Alpha Scarlet? Someone asked timidly. Scarlet frowned, thinking was anyone in this pack free from abuse? Because you are part of my pack and from this day on, no one in my pack suffers. She said confidently, her eyes locked with the man, her alpha aura surrounding her. Applause broke out and a murmur of whispers crossed the crowd. She could hear a few through the link telling her they wanted to join and would follow all the rules. It seemed they were going to be dealing with a lot of fearful wolves for a while, but she knew the Blood Moon Pack and Elijah would be there every step of the way. It was much later, and Elijah and Scarlet were leaving Michael and Aaron in charge as they needed to head back. After all, there were a few things to handle back home. They were heading back that very night after one last thing they needed to do here. Most of the pack members were happy to come, but there were a few bitter ones who had family who had sided with Zidane. The option to join another pack was open for them. She had made it clear the current land would be sold off, but everyone would be given a lump sum to start afresh. The overall move would take time and Scarlet knew someone would need to come back and handle everything until the pack would be able to shift. There was a lot of work that would need to be done, building homes, making space for all the new pack members. At least 700 people were coming. About 50 would be heading back in the next 2 days, but housing them wouldn't be easy. Elijah didn't want Scarlet staying here and handling it, knowing the effect the place had on her, deciding to talk to his father when he got back. They couldn't leave Aaron here long-term either, Monica was pregnant. Elijah had an idea and he hoped his father agreed. Jackson had also rung, telling them that Alpha Daniel had been the one to rat them out to Zidane as he was in dire need of some money. Although Scarlet seemed to accept it, something niggled at Elijah's mind. It couldn't only be Daniel, sure, he knew the date and plan, but to know what car Scarlet had got into, it had to be a pack member. He said nothing, thinking he would get to the bottom of it himself when they returned home. They were now at the pack hospital to see Candice before leaving. The nurse let them in instantly, knowing exactly who they were. The smell of disinfectant and sterilized rooms filled their noses. Scarlet, Alpha Elijah, Candice said, struggling to sit up. Scarlet looked at her, seeing the woman in another light as she hurried over and helped adjust her bed. Elijah had told her who she was, but to believe it was not easy. This woman was her grandmother. Candice, she said, unsure what to say. The elder woman smiled gently. You would have made your grandfather proud. Her words made Scarlet's eyes widen slightly, and Elijah decided to give them a moment. About to leave the room, Scarlet looked at him. Stay, she said softly. He turned back and walked over to her, standing next to where she sat. He placed his hands on her shoulders as Candice looked between them. You were mates then? She said, smiling. Obviously, Elijah said, as if he never ever had a doubt. The older woman chuckled weakly. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Scarlet said, remembering the emotions that she had seen that day in Candice's eyes. Because Zidane didn't like to be associated with me. Most of the pack members who knew who I am are long dead, others are forced into silence. I couldn't stay around the pack and do my best without keeping my identity a secret. Ever since your mother left and Zidane dragged me out of that dungeon to hold the pack together, I knew I had to keep doing what a Luna does. Even if it was just trying to keep them safe. She said gravely. Scarlet looked at the woman before her, a woman brave enough to go from Luna to Omega for her people. She felt growing respect for her even more than before. If it was not for her help, a lot more people would have died in the battle. You are the finest Luna I have ever met, and I know even my grandfather would think so. She said quietly. Candice smiled. Indeed, she said. Scarlet never remembered him. She only knew Zidane had killed him the moment he got a chance and taken over as Alpha. How is your mother? She's good, married and in love. She never mentioned you. Scarlet said, thinking even Candice didn't seem to know she had been Zidane's daughter until she had mentioned it. We never met. I was locked away the moment your grandfather was murdered. I only knew Zidane's woman and children left and died as they tried to escape. She said, adjusting herself on her cushions. The pain she was in was not decreasing, and she had a feeling if she made it out of this, the pain would remain. Scarlet remained quiet. It was a vicious cycle. Zidane had not even spared the mother who had given birth to him. Will you come home with us? Scarlet asked. Candice was one of the members who had said nothing. She smiled sadly and took Scarlet's hand in her own. I would love to, but I can't. This pack, this land meant so much to your grandfather. I understand why you are doing what you are, and I think it's a good idea. After all, you two are mates. But I request you leave me a small square of land. There's a small cottage your grandfather built years ago before he was Alpha. Needs a bit of fixing, but I would love to remain here. She said quietly. Scarlet looked at her and nodded, although it was sad. She knew that her grandmother needed this. Pick wherever you want. I will join your pack though, because I can't become a rogue, but I will remain a lone wolf. Candice said. She doubted she had too long to live. There was a limit to what the body could heal from after all. It could be dangerous, Elijah said. The woman waved her hand weakly. It doesn't matter, if I'm meant to die then I will. She said. Scarlet and Elijah exchanged a look. Although her choice wasn't the most ideal, they couldn't force her and would respect her wishes. So the first alpha female we have heard of has now taken her place. How does it feel? I don't really know. They say I'm special or a blessing with my fast healing and the ability to mortally wound others. What's the point of these powers when I couldn't even save my friend from dying in my arms? Scarlet said quietly, her voice full of pain and bitterness. Candice looked at her sympathetically. You are not Selene, you cannot grant life, child. Each wolf is given healing beyond a human's capability, but we are not immortal. You survived your father only because of your healing, and because of that you have saved so many lives from Zidane. Her words were true. Although her gift may not have been what she would have preferred, it had its uses. She would never forget how Liam had died protecting her. You are special. The goddess bestowed this gift upon you, accept it, appreciate it, and don't question it. Candice said. Scarlet simply nodded as Elijah caressed her arms. Candice gave her a final encouraging smile. Now, let's leave all this and tell me what you plan to do next. The young couple began telling her what they had planned, and the elder woman listened, a small smile on her face, her hand never once letting go of Scarlet's. They had arrived home late at night, and although they didn't get much rest after discussing things with Jackson, they had squeezed a few hours in. Elijah had called a pack meeting for the following morning. There were some people exempt from it, mostly those in mourning. Although Jackson wanted to know the reason, he refused to say anything. They now were sat around the kitchen table. The sun was barely up in the sky. Being back made everyone think of Liam. Right about now he would be training the first group of warriors. Scarlet wanted to visit his parents as well, which she would do whilst Elijah had his meeting. The pain of his loss was hitting her harder than she had thought it would. "I'm going to go shower, I'll be right back," Scarlet said, standing up. She bent down, cupping Elijah's jaw as she kissed him before leaving their parents and Elijah alone. "Dad, as you know, we need someone to overlook things with the Desert Storm pack, and we can all agree Scarlet suffered the most there. So, I think you and Jessica should do it. It'll only take a few months. I'll handle things down here while you're gone. I think you can at least do that much for all you gave us," Elijah said, looking at his father, a frown on his face. Jackson frowned deeply, knowing he had a point about Scarlet, but did not appreciate the rest of his comment. He sighed heavily, gritting his teeth, knowing Elijah was right though. "Fine, I get it, I messed up. You two are mates. I'm not against you two being together now, so at least drop the snarky comments, Elijah," he said, frowning at his son, wondering how did their relationship turn so hostile. "You mean we aren't against the two of you? You're not doing us a favor here. We are mates," Elijah said coldly. Jackson massaged his temples. "Okay, I'm sorry, all right," he said in defeat, looking at his son. Elijah frowned but gave a curt nod. "I'll accept it for now, but you should go up north. The pack, knowing Jessica as well, might help a little," he said curtly. "And since you are the alpha, start initiating them into our pack. Is Scarlet waiting until everyone is settled then joining again?" "Yeah, she gets she can't just break the link to her pack when they've already been in until they're initiated. We can't risk a pack of rogues on our hands," Elijah said. Jessica nodded. That makes sense, but she'll feel each snap of a pack member leaving the desert storm. She said concerned. I'm a strong woman, Mama. I can handle it. Scarlet said, re-entering the kitchen, her sweet intoxicating hitting Elijah strongly mixed with her body wash and shampoo. She smelled beyond divine. He pulled her into his lap, taking in how gorgeous she looked in her oversized black jumper dress. Her hair was left open and she wore no makeup, still looking as breathtaking as ever. Her stomach fluttered when he kissed her passionately, making tingles ripple through her. Desire growing within her, she wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her head in his shoulder to calm her erratic heartbeat. Whilst Elijah smirked, his hand slipping under the hem of her dress, stroking her thigh, which only made it harder for her. Jessica looked at them, glad that her daughter's mate was not an abusive man. Well, since that is sorted, I will go pack. We will leave right after the funerals, she said, looking at Jackson with finality. He nodded and she left the room. Just the reminder made Scarlet lift her head. They would be having the combined funeral the following day and she was dreading facing every one of the lost pack members' families. Care to share what your meeting today is for? Jackson asked. There's a traitor amongst us. Did Alpha Daniel really not say anything? Elijah said as Scarlet frowned. No, and I'm sure if there was, don't you think he would have? Jackson said. Scarlet nodded in agreement. Only if there wasn't something in it for him. It's a shame you don't let me tear him apart for what he did. Elijah growled. You know the rules, Elijah. We can't mess with another's pack. His allies are already isolating him, that is enough. Jackson said, standing up. Let's get to this meeting and put your mind at rest. Elijah said nothing. He knew he was right. He would get his answers soon enough. I'll see you later, Scarlet said before giving him a long passionate kiss, making Jackson shake his head and leave the room first. Elijah pulled her close, making her shift in his lap until she was now straddling him. If you're going to kiss me, kitten, make it hot, he murmured, groaning as she rubbed herself against his growing bulge. Don't tempt me, Alpha, she whispered before their lips met once again. Elijah twisted his fingers into her hair, taking control, realizing she was only wearing a thong. He groaned against her. You're driving me crazy, he murmured, not missing the breathy moans that were leaving her. She forced herself back. You have a meeting to attend, remember, she said, tracing his lips with her finger, getting off his lap still a little breathless. Elijah, Jackson called. We need our own place, Elijah muttered, standing up, delivering a sharp slap to her. He smirked as she jumped and glared at him. He winked at her before he left the room, ready to face this meeting. A short while later, Elijah looked around at those he had gathered. There were members like Monica, Jessica, and the younger wolves he hadn't called. He had his suspects, Fiona and her father being at the top of that list. Although he wasn't expecting it to be Fiona, not thinking she was capable of something so cruel, but then again, didn't love blind a person? He had caught her scent the day they were leaving, accompanied by the strong feeling of being watched. The woman now stood quite close to him, watching him with that irritating look in her eyes. He wished he had never make up her to begin with. Just the thought now repulsed him. I'm not here to waste my time when I have so many things to attend to. If it wasn't for someone in this pack sharing intel with the enemy, we may not have lost as many as we did. Elijah said, his eyes flitting between the Williamsons. Not missing Fiona's eyes widen, the color draining from her face. He almost scoffed he was correct. Before I even ask anyone to step forward, what do you think is the befitting punishment for such a crime? The members exchanged looks, a few mutterings and shaking their heads. Throw them in the cells to rot. Better yet, exile them from the pack, declared rogue they can die or fend for themselves. Kill then, I mean we lost loads. As Alpha, you need to set an example. A lash for every person we lost. Beta Nick said coldly. Liam was like a son to him and the son of his close friends. I like that idea. Elijah said quietly. And then death. Fiona gasped, her heart thundering. Would Elijah blame her? Would he find out? She looked at him, her heart hammering. His next words made her blood run cold. Fiona stepped forward. Elijah said icily, his cold glare looking into her hazel eyes. Everyone stared at the young woman known to be sweet and caring. Surely he was wrong. Letting his alpha aura roll off him, Elijah stepped closer to the trembling girl. Did you tell anyone about what car Scarlet was traveling in? His command for an answer vibrating through the room. Her father tensed, his eyes wide as he stared at his daughter in shock. Fiona dropped to her knees sobbing as she made to grab Elijah's leg, who stepped back smoothly. I love you. I did it for you. I deserve to be by your side. I didn't mean for anyone else to die. Just Scarlet. Elijah's eyes flashed, his rage flaring up. That's my mate you're talking about. He spat. Leaning down he grabbed her, yanking her to her feet and squeezing her neck. Wanting to kill her right there, but death was too easy for her. He threw her to the ground, not caring for the cry that left her lips. His eyes darkening as his wolf surfaced. He turned and looked at Nick, trying not to snap right there. Throw her in the dungeons. Since she wishes to spend time with me, I will personally see to her lashing. She will be put to death if she survives the lashes. He said coldly, clenching his fists as he tried to control his rage. The smell of blood filled the room as the pack members saw the red droplets trickling down his clenched fists. Please, Alpha. Fiona whimpered, but Elijah had had enough. He had been too nice. Not only had she cost so many their lives, she had wanted Scarlet hurt or dead. That was something he could never ever forget. Scarlet sat nervously in the living room of Liam's parents' house. His mother Samantha looked to have aged several years and his father was sat quietly. Scarlet's heart ached to look at the man who looked to be an elder version of Liam himself. Was that how Liam would have looked if he got to live to that age? Her eyes stung at the very thought. I'm sorry, she said in a whisper, breaking the tense silence that had settled in the room. Samantha shook her head sadly, fighting her own tears. How exactly did he die? She asked, trying to remain strong as her husband placed his head in his hands, his body heaving with silent sobs. His wife and maid placed a hand on his back as she looked at Scarlet. The young woman looked at her, tears blurring her vision. He died because he shielded me, she said before she looked down, letting her hair curtain her face as she cried softly, trying to control herself, placing her face in her hands. Then don't cry. There is no other way he would have liked to go. He's loved you ever since you came to this pack. I remember when he came running home and told me a tough little girl had joined the pack. He's always hoped you would be his mate, but fate had other plans. Don't cry, Scarlet, you are the future Luna. Remember Liam died protecting the woman he loved. He was, Samantha's voice broke, her strong resolve trembling. Was a boy with a heart of gold. Don't forget him. Scarlet nodded and Liam's father looked up. We don't hold you accountable for what happened. He made his choice and we are proud of him. He said quietly. Thank you, Scarlet said, not knowing how she felt. She took her leave soon after, her heart feeling a little lighter knowing they didn't hold her accountable. Liam. She would never forget him. Elijah entered the cells after telling Scarlet he'd be back late tonight. He didn't want to tell her exactly where he was or what he was going to do, but Fiona had done enough damage and he was the one who would deal with her. He walked to the end of the hall, to the end cell where he could hear her crying. His anger emanating from him. The two warriors at the doors lowered their heads to him. One of them handed him a pair of gloves and he put them on before taking the silver chain whip. Open it, he said, seeing Fiona wearing plain white clothing, her arms hooked up, her back facing him. Alpha. Alpha, you're here to save me, aren't you? She said, her voice shaky. Elijah walked around until he stood in front of her. You really are delusional, he said coldly. I regret ever having anything to do with you. Her eyes widened in shock, her L.P. quivering. You don't mean that, she whispered. Elijah didn't bother correcting her, she was too stuck on her ways. Do you know how many men we lost? In total 143. He said coldly. Please don't, Alpha D. Daniel. I only did what he wanted. She whimpered. Don't lie. Elijah snapped, his eyes flashing. I checked your phone records, you contacted him after searching for his number. He didn't care, nor did he have time to entertain her. He walked around her, letting the whip trail on the floor, the metal scraping against the stone floor, making the fear within Fiona grow. For every man we lost, you will get one lash. We won't stop until you're unconscious, and then when you wake, we'll start against from one. This will continue until you die. His voice was a low, dangerous growl, the anger bubbling around him. Not only did you assist the enemy, you tried to kill your Luna. He raised the whip, his eyes hard. He was Alpha, and as Alpha it was his duty to give out this punishment. Although deep inside he knew it was a side of him he never wanted Scarlet to see. Start counting, if you lose count, I'll keep going, he said icily. Fiona shivered in fear, turning just as she saw him raise the whip. Please don't. Please. She screamed in agony as the first lash hit her back. Elijah's eyes were cold. He didn't ever want to resort to this, but the woman had attempted to get Scarlet out of the picture. Count, he commanded. 01. She sobbed. Good, he said icily as he struck again, zoning her screams out, not even affected by them. Each lash made her scream louder, the shrill sound echoing around the empty cell. The guards outside remained silent. Elijah stayed true to his words. He didn't stop. He didn't stop. She stopped counting and he didn't bother reminding her. At one point he heard some commotion. Her father had come to beg for her life, but he didn't even turn to look at the man who was screaming as his daughter was lashed. Elijah frowned. He would never condone such behavior, but when someone was responsible for so much over a petty infatuation, and when they targeted their Luna, he would do anything to make a statement. 100 lashes later, Elijah was sweating. Fiona's screams had long since died out. He wasn't even sure if she was still conscious. Raising the whip again, he stopped when he heard the sound of footsteps running towards him, accompanied by the sweet intoxicating scent of his mate. It overrode the smell of blood and sweat. "Open it!" Scarlet snapped at the guards before she stepped inside. She took in the pool of blood, the limp body of the woman who was suspended by her arms, her back torn open. Then looked at Elijah. Blood was splashed over him, his eyes were hard and cold. "Why are you here?" Elijah said, looking into her eyes. The moon shone from the small window at the top of the cell. Barely a handspan wide, her heart thumped at how cold his eyes looked. "Don't do this, this isn't you," Scarlet said, closing the gap between them. She locked her arms around his neck. Elijah frowned, feeling her trembling in his arms. Her heart was thudding, when the realization hit. He was doing something her father would have done. But he still thought Fiona deserved it. Zidane tortured the weak and innocent, but he was giving a punishment fitting for a traitor. "I'm sorry," he said, dropping the whip before he hugged her tightly. She didn't move back, not until her racing heart had calmed down. "Sorry for how you're feeling. She's the reason you were kidnapped. The reason you had to suffer at that hands." Scarlet cupped his jaw, knowing he felt her pain. She pressed her forehead against his, pulling him down slightly. "I know, but we don't need to waste our time. Let's go home, baby," she whispered. Elijah closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I need to finish this," he said. Opening his eyes, he looked into her pain-filled green eyes. He kissed her lips softly before moving back. He saw the slight movement in Fiona's hand and knew what he needed to do. "You're lucky Scarlet came," he said coldly as he now walked around and stood in front of her. Her face was pale, her hair limp and soaked. Her eyes were half open as if too lost in the pain she was in. "I'll make this quick." Not waiting for a reply or action, he reached forward and snapped her head with a sickening crunch, making Scarlet gasp as Fiona's head dropped forward on her chest and her heart stopped beating. "Leave her there until tomorrow," he said to the guards as he took the gloves off, tossing them to the ground before he took Scarlet's hand and led her away from there. "Elijah, promise me something," she said softly. He looked at her, grabbing a towel from the rack near the entrance to the cells, wiping some of the blood of him. "Lil try, what is it?" he said, leading her up to the ground floor of the pack house. "Stop blaming yourself," she said quietly. He froze in his tracks. He had been about to reach for the front door but now looked at her. "What do you mean?" he said, although he knew what she meant. It had been the one thing on his mind. If he hadn't been involved with Fiona, all this could have been avoided. "Stop acting stupid, you know what I mean," she said, now wrapping her arms around his neck, placing a soft kiss on his mate mark, making his breath hitch. "She was a part of your past, we all have one. What she became was from her own choices. Whatever happened has happened. Let's move on from this, baby, please." Elijah held her tightly, his muscular arms tight around her tiny waist. He caressed her waist thinking she was so tiny, yet so strong. "You're right," he said quietly, sighing deeply. Taking a deep whiff of her hair to calm himself, letting her scent fill his senses. Tomorrow was the funeral and then they could move on from all of this. "Let's get you cleaned up," she said softly. They returned home. It was now silent, and Elijah realized he had been down there for a few hours. "Shall I run you a bath or do you want a shower? Join me," he said quietly. She looked into his eyes and nodded. She had splatters of blood on her now too. Letting him take her hand, he led her to the bathroom that they shared. Although they were mostly in his room as it was the furthest away. They stepped into the shower after stripping, their eyes appreciating the other. Scarlet blushed lightly as she saw her eyes fall on him. His eyes darkening as her stomach fluttered. Elijah turned it on, pulling her close as the warm water poured over them both. "Red," he said quietly as they simply stood under that water. She looked up into his eyes. His gaze was fixed on her, but she knew it wasn't because he was distracted for some reason. He couldn't look her in the eye. Concern filled her as she pressed her body against his and tilted her head up. "What is it?" she asked, cupping his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "When Liam, before he died, he said you were his only dream, you kissed him," he said. She could feel the anger from him, although he had his emotions blocked off, that much she could tell. She didn't speak knowing he wasn't done. If things had turned out differently or if Liam had turned out to be your mate, would you have chosen him? She didn't miss the guilt in his eyes, knowing he felt terrible to even be asking about his dead friend like this, but she also knew he needed to. "I won't apologize for that kiss. It was all I could give him, at least something to cherish before he passed away," she said softly, seeing the flash of anger in his eyes. His grip on her hips tightening possessively. "But if he had been my mate or anyone, I would have still chosen you. You're the one I love. It's your every touch, every gaze, every word that makes my body and mind get lost within it." There was no pleasure in that kiss. From my side it was just a pure simple farewell kiss. He watched her knowing she wasn't lying. He understood why she had done it, even if he didn't like it. Her words always calmed him. Several weeks had passed since then and the pack was thriving. The funerals had been hard, but every pack member was honored. Fiona's parents had been excluded from the pack. Elijah still did not forgive Meredith for her attack on Scarlet back at that meeting and didn't need any more toxic people with a motive for revenge around. The only odd occurrence was the strange murder of Alpha Daniel. He had been found dead in his bedroom. There had been no sign of a break-in or even any scent, and so no fingers had pointed at anyone. Of course, there was a certain name that crossed both Elijah and Scarlet's minds, but neither spoke of it. Alpha Daniel was the reason all the allied packs lost members, and no one really cared about his death. His beta was to take charge of the pack until Daniel's 12-year-old son was ready to take over at 18. The matter was soon forgotten as everyone moved on from the events that had occurred. Half of the old Desert Storm pack had been moved to their pack and everyone who was to join was initiated. They had constructed a second pack house and many smaller houses for families. Scarlet had sold off Zidane's shares and transferred some of the businesses into their packs, making the pack finances grow along with the large number that had now joined them. There were a few who joined other packs and Jackson and Elijah helped settle them wherever they wanted to go. Candice had recovered rather well and was happily living in her cottage. Things had been smooth sailing for everyone, and the mood had lifted a lot over the past few weeks. Monica was now supporting a very noticeable baby bump. A werewolf pregnancy was 6 months long rather than the usual 9 months like a human. Jackson and the rest of the members had arrived, although some were still staying at hotels whilst more houses were being built. Although everyone had worked fast to build more houses, they still needed several more. Things were in all coming along smoothly. Things had been great for Scarlet and Elijah as well, with most people accepting their relationship, and although a few had found it surprising, they had come to terms with it very fast. Admittedly, the two made a great pair and were very much in love. Scarlet's nightmares were less frequent, but Elijah had seen enough to vow never to hurt her. The amount of abuse she had been through at the hands of Zidane was not something he would ever forget. Elijah had also decided to build them a home, and it was something he worked on quite often himself. Knowing the rest of the pack members who knew how to build were making houses for the rest of the new pack members. Angela and Cassandra had gone on a short trip away, and much to Scarlet's happiness, her friend had returned marked. Both had decided to stay at the Blood Moon pack, and Cassandra had also been initiated into the pack. She was a confident, strong woman who was very patient, something Scarlet had to admit one needed with Angela. Today was the day Elijah officially became Alpha and Jackson stepped down. It was also the day Scarlet would officially rejoin the pack and take her place as Elijah's Luna. She, Angela, Cassandra, Monica and Indigo had gone shopping for tonight's party a few weeks ago, and they were all excited, Scarlet included, who for once hadn't minded going to several stores to try on countless dresses. Their Alpha and Luna ceremony was nothing less than a wedding and was one of the most important events in the life of an Alpha. It was now mid-afternoon and Scarlet was sitting in Angela and Cassandra's lounge. Monica and Indigo were here too. A few makeup artists were getting them ready. Angela had refused to let her see Elijah all day, being annoying and saying they had too much to do. Scarlet now sat there glaring at her best friend. "I hate you," she said as Angela simply rolled her eyes. "I don't care, babe. Look, Elijah needs to yearn for you. You're always stuck to him like glue." Cassandra and Monica laughed at this, but Scarlet simply pouted. "Well, he is my mate. You're one to talk. Cassandra's right here." "She isn't wrong, Angel," Cassandra said, leaning over and giving Angela a soft kiss. Scarlet pouted. Although she was happy for her friend, she did miss Elijah. "Thinking of me?" His voice came through the mind link. Obviously, although Angela was like, "Don't even mind link," Scarlet replied, looking in the mirror as the stylist tugged at her hair. Luckily the women were from the pack, so could get ready comfortably at home rather than go into town. She needs to be put in her place. "You're the Luna kitten, the alpha female. Show her who's boss." Scarlet smirked, amused at his reply. "So what is my handsome hunk doing?" she asked, as the woman began working on her makeup. She glanced outside, seeing the sun was low in the sky. Not long now, she thought. Just a few preps for tonight's ceremony. "Can't wait for you to be my official Luna baby." His husky voice sent a knot of pleasure through her and she bit her lip. "Me too, see you later," she said before ending the link, knowing if they continued she would want to find him right then. Scarlet was mind-linking Elijah, Indigo added, making Scarlet glare at her. "Oh, leave her alone," Monica said, making Scarlet give her an appreciative smile. Once Scarlet's hair and makeup were complete, she stood up and walked over to her glamorous red gown. Her heart skipped a beat, her nerves getting the better of her. Feeling a wave of nausea hit her, she covered her mouth, fanning her face. "You okay, babe?" Angela asked, jumping up startled. All eyes turned to Scarlet, who nodded. "Yeah, perfectly," she said. "I just feel sick." Silence ensued as the 6 women in the room stared at her. "Oh my god, maybe you're," Monica said. Scarlet's eyes widened. She hadn't had a period in ages. "Oh wow. Does this mean I'm going to be a double aunt?" Indigo said, jumping up. Wait. Remember the time I bought you those tests, Monica? I'm sure I have the extra one somewhere," Angela said, rushing from the room. "She's not going to rest until you have tested," Cassandra said, amused. "How are you feeling, Luna?" one of the other women named Leah asked. "Let's see if it's even true," Scarlet said, just as Angela came rushing in, waving the packet in triumph. "Off you go," she said, ushering Scarlet towards the bathroom. Scarlet gave her a glare. "Stop it. I won't be telling anyone but Elijah first," she snapped, making Angela's face fall. Her eyes widening in sadness. "Really?" she said. Scarlet narrowed her eyes. "Yes, unless you zip it," she said, secretly thinking she really wasn't going to tell anyone until she told Elijah. She entered the bathroom, taking a deep breath. "Well, here goes nothing." The day had passed by painfully slowly for Elijah. He had prepared a surprise for Scarlet, having finally been able to finish the house. Scarlet had already discussed the stuff she had wanted, and he had secretly made sure to remember everything, not telling her that he had got more of it done than she had thought. He had prepared it for tonight, making sure even the fridge was stocked for the following morning. He now closed the wardrobe, which had a few of their clothing items, and looked at his suit that lay on the bed in their new bedroom. This was it, the big night. Picking up the small box that stood on the bedside table, his heart skipped a beat. Removing the towel, he began getting dressed, thinking he couldn't wait to see her. An hour later he was dressed and out in the open grounds of the pack area. They had too many pack members to fit in the Alpha Mansion's gardens. The area was now illuminated with lanterns, fairy lights, and garlands of red roses. Tables and chairs were set to the side, with an entire side behind the tables dedicated to the open barbecue area, where the Omegas were already grilling meat and talking happily. He was happy to see that the members had welcomed their new pack mates. That made him proud to see. Their Omegas worked happily alongside them, and he could see they were coming out of their shells. Music played in the background, and there were already some younger pups dancing. Raphael and his mate Maria had also come to the ceremony. Spotting his friend Elijah, he made his way over to them. "Raphael, welcome," he said, meeting his friend with a hug. "Thanks," Raphael replied. Elijah turned to the woman, giving her a small smile. "Nice to see you again, Maria," he said, taking her hand and giving it a shake. He had attended their wedding a few weeks back with Scarlet. "Thank you, Alpha," she said with a smile. Just then the intoxicating floral scent that always drove him crazy filled his senses and he turned to look towards the source. It felt as if time stopped when he saw her standing there. Everyone else faded from his view as his eyes ran over her. She wore a stunning red silk strap dress with one shoulder strap. The silk wrapped from the front and went all around on her right, hugging her curves perfectly, showing off a panel of the underlayer sequin mini dress. There was enough rift in the show that made Elijah want to take it in his arms and devour it. She wore gold heels on her feet and dangly earrings sparkled in her ears. Her hair was styled in a quiff, leaving the rest curled and open. Her makeup was soft, enhancing her natural features, and she had traded her usual red lips for a deep nude. Scarlet looked up, feeling Elijah's gaze on her. She saw him standing there, looked extremely handsome in a cream suit. A collarless white shirt underneath had a few buttons left open, showing off some of his chest. Her heart hammered thinking of the news she had found out not long ago. News she had had to tell her friends after Angela's consistent nagging. Even her dress had felt a little tight on her stomach, although she had tried it on just 2 weeks ago. Luckily it still fitted. Elijah was the first one to move. Closing the gap between them, he caught her by the waist and pulled her close. She locked her arms around his neck, gasping when he bent her over backwards, kissing her passionately. People whistled and hooted, watching the display of affection, only moving back when she was left gasping for air. He looked down at her, a smirk on his lips. "You look divine, kitten," he said, his hand slipping under the silk layer of her dress, shamelessly squeezing her. She felt her heart skip a beat, pleasure shooting to her. "You look pretty yourself," she said, running her hand down his bare chest, before placing a kiss on his neck as he slowly straightened her up. "Well, don't keep her all to yourself, boy," Amelia said, hurrying over and tugging Scarlet from Elijah's grip. He growled at the older woman, who scoffed. "Play nice," Scarlet said to him, hugging the elder woman. "Elijah, how do I look?" Indigo said, spinning in her deep blue gown. "Gorgeous, although isn't that dress a bit too revealing for you?" he asked, frowning. Indigo glared at him. "Oh, so it's okay for Scarlet to have her boobs on show, but I can't have some back and leg on display? Are you two arguing?" Jackson said, coming over with a sigh. "Don't you think they do that a lot more lately?" Scarlet said with a smirk, finding herself back in Elijah's arms. "They are," Jessica agreed with a smile. "You're probably pumping his ears up," Indigo said with a smirk, although she didn't believe that. Learning about everything Scarlet had been through, how she protected her from a young age, had made the younger girl regret half the things she had said to her sister. Although she still liked to annoy her, after all, what else are sisters for? Elijah smirked. "It's not really true. We don't really talk about others when we're alone, Pixie," he said. His remark making several people laugh, making Indigo cheeks redden in annoyance. "Okay, enough banter. Let's get this ceremony over with," Jackson said, slapping Elijah on the back. Things had gotten better between them over the last few weeks and the women of the family were relieved. "Guess we should," Elijah said, becoming serious. Scarlet took his hand, letting him lead her to the low dais that had been set up. Jackson and Jessica stepped onto the dais and Jackson looked around at his pack, thinking the day had come. "Thank you for attending tonight," we are gathered to witness a special time in our pack's history. I will be passing my legacy on to my son. I am sure he will take this pack to heights that even I wasn't able to. He has already done so much to prove he is capable. I am proud to call him my son." Jackson said, his eyes filled with emotions, looking at his son with pride. Elijah gave a small nod before Jackson motioned for him to join him on stage. Taking the small dagger which was used to initiate pack members. "I Alpha Jackson Westwood relinquish my position of Alpha of the Blood Moon Pack to my son Elijah Westwood, to be bound by oath to serve, protect, and lead this pack from here on." He sliced his hand before passing the knife to Elijah. "I Elijah Westwood accept the position of Alpha of the Blood Moon Pack and vow to serve, protect, and lead this pack from here on to the best of my abilities," he said, slicing his own hand before shaking it with his father. Both men felt the shift of the power as the passage of the Alpha's power was completed. By default, it took away Jessica's place as Luna and Nyx as Beta. Everyone applauded and clapped, but Elijah's eyes only found Scarlet's. He now reached for her hand, helping her onto the stage. "It's time to join the family, kitten," he whispered. She nodded, her heart skipping a beat. She was finally going to be complete. In every way, bound to this pack from now till the end. "Ready?" She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Ready. Do you Alpha Scarlet vow to treat the Blood Moon Pack as your home and family? To stand by my side as my Luna as well as CO Alpha?" he said, taking everyone by surprise at his change of the traditional vow. Scarlet smiled softly. "I do," she said. Elijah sliced his own hand, before taking hers and gently slicing it. They shook hands, their blood mingling, and Scarlet was surprised to feel a shift in power, making Elijah smirk. She was after all an Alpha. The pack link was back and she could feel the link between all her members. This was what it felt like to be complete. "I give you your new Alpha and Luna," Jackson said. "You mean Alphas?" Aaron shouted, making every laugh and cheer. "Yes, Alphas," Jackson corrected, smiling slightly as the couple hugged. "Welcome back, Red," Elijah murmured in her ear, making her smile. He kissed her before stepping back and turned to the pack. "I would like to appoint Aaron Nicholson as my Beta and Michael Bradley as my Delta." The pack cheered as Aaron made his way onto the stage, and Michael looked shocked, not expecting it, but it was something Elijah and Scarlet had discussed and felt it was the right thing to do. He came over to the stage and everyone cheered for their new Beta and Delta. "Now I know we all want to party and eat the delicious food being prepped, but there's one more thing I want to do. Before we get to that," Elijah said, now turning and looking at Scarlet. He let go of her waist, stepping back, making her raise her eyebrow. He looked at her, his heart racing, thinking this was it. "I fell in love with you before I even knew you were meant to be mine. I was ready to claim you and keep you forever, even if destiny had other plans," he said, his voice loud and clear in the now silent gathering. To her surprise, he then went down on one knee, making her gasp. "Scarlet, I love you more than life itself. You mean the world to me, so will you do me the honor of marrying me?" he asked quietly, taking out a necklace with a diamond pendant at the end. Her hand went to her chest as everyone awed watching the Alpha's proposal. Scarlet's heart pounded, feeling emotional as she nodded, gazing into those cerulean orbs she loved so much. "Yes. Yes, I will," she said, trying to hold back her tears. Elijah stood up and held the necklace he had taken hours to choose out to put it on her. She turned, brushing her hair aside, letting him hook it on as everyone clapped. He kissed her shoulder softly, sending sparks of pleasure through her. "I thought a necklace with a long chain was more ideal for when you shift," he said softly. She turned, gripping his neck a little roughly, and pulled him close, kissing him passionately. Her move making a few men chuckle and whistle. "I love the idea," she said through the mind link. He smirked against her lips when they finally parted. She bit her lip, feeling him throb against her stomach. "Not getting excited, are you, Alpha?" she mocked, pressing herself fully against him. "Keep teasing, I'll have you on your knees throating this baby girl," he said. She bit back a moan. "Okay, I get it," she said, moving away from him. "Come on. Let's go dance." Elijah smirked. He had smelled her arousal and it only made him want to tease her even more. "You sure, kitten? 'Cause we could sneak away," he whispered. "Elijah. Behave," she said, glaring at him. Okay, one dance. Then food, then we're out of here," he said, his eyes trailing over her, licking his lips. She saw his eyes glazing and knew he was mind-linking someone. Instantly the current song stopped playing and the lights dimmed a little. The song Unconditionally by Katy Perry began playing and Scarlet's eyes widened, looking into Elijah's cerulean blue ones. "I never knew you could be so romantic," she teased as he cupped her waist, pulling her close. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, looking up into his eyes. "Anything for my girl," he said. This song was the closest thing he could find to show how he felt about her. Their foreheads touched as they began swaying to the music. Scarlet closed her eyes, letting the lyrics sink in. Her heart was racing at their proximity and his touch. This felt like heaven on earth. Memories flashing through her mind. Elijah. The boy who could have any woman and did, fell in love and became someone she would never have dreamed of. Her step-brother whom she had once crushed on secretly. A forbidden desire they had both given into. One she was glad had happened, glad he hadn't relented and had always pushed his way in even when she had tried to push him away. His love for her truly was unconditional. They swayed to the music, both lost in the other. The warmth of the other's body was pleasant, their scents mixing, and the sparks that danced through their bodies was all they could focus on. Only one other. The sound of the laughing children, the chattering adults, or the boisterous jokes of the men, everything was lost to them. Nothing mattered to the two lovers who moved as one on that dance floor under the night sky. Slowly other couples began joining the dance floor. Aaron and Monica, Cassandra and Angela, and many more. All enjoying the night of happiness. After months and in some of their cases years of pain and tension. This night of laughter and happiness was a pleasant welcome for all. Scarlet opened her eyes as the song came to an end and looked into his eyes. "I love you, Elijah, with all my heart and soul," she whispered. "I love you way more, kitten, and don't argue on it with me," he said, smirking slightly before kissing her tenderly. It was soft yet deep, their love rushing through that kiss. A kiss that meant more than 1,000 words ever could. They danced to a few songs before eating some of the food that was prepared. Sitting and chatting with their friends. The girls taking a few selfies and forcing the boys to pose with them too. Elijah had just finished his drink, something Scarlet had avoided but Elijah hadn't questioned thanks to Angela passing her a non-alcoholic one. The woman was super excited to become an aunt. Elijah now turned to her. "Come on, there's something I want to show you," he said in her ear, his eyes brushing it teasingly. "It's not your, right?" Angela remarked as Cassandra burst into giggles that she tried to stifle. "Not jealous, are you?" Elijah shot back with an arrogant smirk. "I have the best mate I could have hoped for." Angela shot back, making Monica and Aaron chuckle. "Seriously, just go," Aaron said to his friend, knowing he wanted to show Scarlet their home. He gave Elijah the thumbs up before Scarlet waved at the group and both left the party that was still going strong. Hand in hand they walked away from the brightly lit area towards the trees. "Where are we going?" she asked him. "Patience, kitten," he said smirking, the sound of the music and chatter slowly fading away. "I'm not a patient person, remember," she said, kissing his cheek, his slight stubble grazing her lips. "I like the stubble." "Oh yeah? What else do you like?" he asked. "I could show you," she whispered, "you can show me real soon." He growled, pushing her up against the closest tree and kissing her passionately. Their kisses getting more heated when Scarlet paused. She wanted to tell Elijah about her pregnancy tonight. It still felt so unreal. "I need to tell you something too," she said, gently pushing him away, making him growl as he bit into her neck, making her moan loudly. "Tease," he said, his eyes darkening as he moved back and lifted her bridal style. Carrying her through the trees, Scarlet realized where he was taking her, to the house near the river that he had been working on for them. "Are you taking me to our home?" she asked. He didn't reply when she turned, seeing the glow of lights and her breath caught in her throat. There it stood, glowing with the lights that were turned on inside. She was surprised it was done. He had told her there was so much left to do, and being busy she hadn't even questioned it. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he said, carrying her to the door. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The soft scent of vanilla filled her nose and she looked around, seeing the house that looked even better than the image she had in her head. Not missing the table she had wanted for the entrance hall or the chevron rug. She looked at Elijah, her eyes stinging with tears. "You got this ready for me?" she whispered, sounding kind of cute, he thought. "For us," he said with a wink, kissing her softly. "And for our future pups. On that note, shall we go practice making some?" She looked at him sharply. It was the first time he had ever really mentioned it. Her heart hammering as he carried her up the stairs. "Don't you want pups?" he asked, noticing her silence as he opened the bedroom door. Scarlet smiled, seeing the dimly lit cozy bedroom decorating with petals and candles as he slowly walked over and sat on the bed, holding her in his arms. "Of course, I do, but I don't think we need to practice making them," she said. Elijah smirked. "True, I'd say we're pretty well practiced in the arts," he said, making Scarlet roll her eyes. One thing was clear, the man was never going to drop. "Although I have to agree to that. The reason I said we don't need to practice is because," she stood up, taking a deep breath before she turned back to him and took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "Is because I'm pregnant." Elijah's eyes widened in shock, staring into her eyes. Hooey, really? He said his heart was racing, it didn't seem real. Him, a father? He said, running his other hand through his hair. Sure, he had said it, but it was already a reality. Scarlet smiled softly, seeing the shock, happiness, and nervousness in his eyes. You will be the best father ever. Our pup will be lucky to have you. She said softly, knowing his unsaid worry. He smiled softly at her. Leaning closer, he gripped her and moved her closer, placing a soft kiss on her stomach before he settled his ear against it, closing his eyes as he listened. Scarlet's heartbeat was strong and he could hear his own. It was then he heard it, not one but two tiny heartbeats, and he moved back stunned. Maybe moving out was a bad idea, he said, his face pale. What do you mean? Scarlet asked, seeing his pale face. We're having twins, kitten. Two little devils. He said, despite his words his voice held awe. Scarlet let out a breathy laugh, shocked at the new revelation. Wow, she said. You're right, it's going to be a mission to handle them. He pulled her into his lap, dropping back onto the bed, the scent of the rose petals filling their noses, making her lie on top of him, both stunned yet happy with the news. They lay in silence for a moment, simply staring at each other. After a moment, Elijah smirked. Well, I guess I did good, right? He said, stroking her. You sure did. So how about you make the most of the time we have before we're changing diapers and carrying babies all night long? She said, ing her lips. His eyes darkened as he gripped the nape of her neck and tugged her down, his lips almost touching hers as he looked into her eyes. Then I guess I best not waste time, he said huskily. I promise you, Red. I'll always treat you like my queen in public, worship you like my goddess in private, and treat you like my doll in bed. A smile graced her face, his words making her stomach all fluttery. She ran her hand down his chest through the opening in his shirt, her nails lightly grazing his skin. I like the sound of that, she whispered before he flipped them over. Now, this was life. 5 years later. Oh, come on, Elijah. You have to wear it. Raphael said, holding up the shiny pink unicorn party hat. Elijah glared at his friend. I wouldn't be caught dead in that. He said. It's Rayhana's birthday. Come on, she's going to cry if you don't. Elijah raised an eyebrow. She's 2. I don't think she'll even care. From across the garden, Scarlet and Maria exchanged looks. Them two argue too much, Maria said as she arranged the sandwich platter and set it down. Bromance at its finest. Indigo called as she walked out from the villa. It was Raphael's second child's birthday and he had rented a villa for some of their friends. Look, she's not wearing one, Elijah said, giving Raphael a look as he pointed at Indigo. Okay, fine. You and Alejandro are such party poopers, he grumbled, glancing at his brother, who, to be honest, he was shocked he had even come for the party. The rest had come the day before, but Alejandro had only turned up 10 minutes ago. The 20-year-old sat on the ground away from the area they had lit up with solar-powered lanterns and fairy lights, busy scrolling through his phone. Raphael's smile vanished as he watched him, concerned. It had been 7 years since they had discovered what he was. 7 years of worrying for his safety, but as the years went by, he realized it wasn't Alejandro who needed protection. The younger man now looked up, his dark cold eyes meeting his brother's warm ones, but before either could say anything the sound of children's laughter and excitement filled the air. The doors opened and out poured the gang of children. At the front were Liam and Rayhan. Both boys racing dangerously fast towards their dads. "I won," Liam said, grabbing Elijah's leg. "No, I did," Rayhan retorted. Raphael sighed. "I think it was a draw. Don't you agree, Elijah?" "Yeah, maybe," Elijah said, earning a frown from Scarlet from across the room. He winked at her and she rolled her eyes looking away. Rayhan was only a week younger than their twins who were 4. Monica and Aaron's son Damon, who had turned 5 a month ago, strolled out lazily, staring at the moon that now peeked out from behind the trees. Raphael's Beta's family was also there. The boys ran off, joining the rest. Whilst one child stood on the steps not moving, her soft sandy blonde hair framed her face as she looked out into the brightly lit garden. Elijah's smile faded as he walked over to his daughter Kiara, concern clear on his face. Unlike her headstrong brother, she was the opposite. He crouched down, looking into her eyes that were a mix of both his and Scarlet's, a sage green with a bright blue ring. He cupped her face and she gave him the purest smile he had ever seen. "What's wrong, cutie patootie?" he asked softly. "Can you see all right?" She nodded. "I can see all this, Daddy," she said, pointing to the brightly lit area. Elijah smiled, kissing her forehead. "That's good." His heart aching a little, he scooped her up in his arm, kissing her cheeks. He'd always be there to take care of her. The party was in full swing. Music played loudly and the children were having a blast. Elijah pulled Scarlet onto the dance floor. "Come on, kitten, one dance," he said, gripping her hips and pressing her firmly against him. His lips meeting hers in a passionate kiss. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. It had been nearly 6 years since they had fallen in love, found out they were mates and had gotten married just over 3 years ago. Each passing day felt like they loved each other a little more, even when it didn't feel like that could be possible. She hadn't changed much, her hair was still the same, but it was slightly longer now. Since having the kids, the only difference was the slightly wider hips. He loved them. When their twins had been born, it was Elijah who had wanted to name their son after Liam, and Scarlet had loved the idea. The children played happily, even Rayhan toddled along. Only Kiara was sat at a table eating a cake pop, her large eyes spotting a glowworm on the ground. Her eyes widened in curiosity and she climbed off her chair, slowly following the worm into the forest. So enchanted she didn't even realize she had strayed from the brightly lit party. Alejandro glanced up from his phone when he saw one of the pups going into the forest, about to look away when he noticed she seemed to be limping slightly. He raised an eyebrow, taking in her sandy blonde hair. "Elijah's kid?" "Probably." He went back to his phone after a glance at her parents, both literally making out on the dance floor. He shook his head. "Why have kids if you couldn't manage them? Their loss." He had come here for a reason, and unless that reason showed up, he had to just wait. This was boring. It was only a few moments later and Scarlet pulled away, feeling something poke at her stomach. "Behave," she said, although her hand teasingly ran over his front, making him smirk. She turned away, glancing at the kids, her smile fading as her heart began to race. Kiera, where's Kiera? All eyes turned to them as everyone began looking. Elijah scanned the trees, trying to catch her scent. The defected pup. Alejandro said, his rugged voice emotionless and cold. Elijah's eyes flashed at the insult. Where is she? He hissed. She went into the forest not long ago, Alejandro. Couldn't you have stopped her? Raphael said as Elijah rushed into the forest, closely followed by Aaron, Indigo, and Scarlet. It's just the forest, not like there's anything out there that's big, bad and scary. He taunted his brother. Raphael's eyes flashed as he walked over to him. Alejandro, she can't see in the dark. She has night blindness for your sake. Can you for once get off your throne and think that we're talking about an innocent child? He shouted, motioning his beta to follow him. It was at that moment Alejandro's ears picked up the low hissing of what he had come here for in the first place. His eyes widened slightly, turning towards the forest. Get the kids inside, he said. Now. Raphael, who had been about to rush into the forest, nodded, his face paling. Alejandro ran into the forest at a speed that left the rest in awe as they quickly ushered the children inside. Elijah and Scarlet followed their daughter's scent, getting deeper and deeper into the forest when they heard her soft voice. Mama, is that you? They froze as they slowed down, padding forward. It was then the putrid smell of decay, rotten eggs and infected blood filled their noses. You won't get near that thing, Alejandro said, now stopping in front of them. Elijah growled quietly, but Alejandro looked at him, then glanced towards the darkness behind him. I'll bring her back. Stay here. He turned and before their eyes, he shifted. To their shock, he didn't shift into a normal wolf, extremely tall and muscular. He still stood on two legs. A mix of a wolf and a man. Black fur covered his muscled body, his face looked like a werewolf from a horror movie. He looked at them for a second, his red eyes glowing before he ran off into the darkness. What is he? Indigo said weakly. No one spoke. Only one word described the thing that he had shifted to. A leakin. Elijah's voice sounded shocked. He didn't move. It all made sense. The killings back in the forest that time. Alpha Daniel's odd murder. The speed and strength he always had as a boy. An alpha of alphas? Indigo asked, her voice shaking. There hasn't been one in existence since the Leakin King 300 years ago, Aaron said through the link. No one spoke. Should we go? Scarlet asked after a moment, her heart racing in fear for her child's life. I think he's far more capable. Elijah said, his tone clipped and cold, knowing he was just stood there, not knowing what was happening with his child. He tensed hearing her faint laugh followed by the sound of her soft voice. Mama? Daddy? Scarlet brushed against him and he rubbed her neck, knowing it was hard for her to just stand here doing nothing. Alejandro moved as fast as possible. Ever since the odd deaths of pups and pregnant women that had been put down to rogue attacks, he had been searching for this thing. However, when the bodies were mainly eaten, he didn't really think it was rogues. He had tracked it close by and it was the reason he had come. It hadn't been for the party. If he went by old lore, it was a vampire-like creature that only came out at night and feasted on children and fetuses. Nothing of the sort had been heard of for hundreds of years. But he existed, what's to say there weren't other monsters out there? He saw the little doll-like child holding her hands out, remembering what Raphael said about her not being able to see. She giggled, sensing the creature move closer to her. "Mama? Daddy?" He frowned. He had one chance, or she was dead. He rushed out just as the creature lurched forward, hissing loudly. Its long tongue extended. Kiera screamed in terror, realizing it was not her parents. Just as Alejandro slammed it across the field, scooping Kiera into his arms, growling dangerously at the creature who hissed and lurched itself at him. In a few seconds, he had torn it to pieces with one hand. Stepping away from the disgusting mess, he turned and walked back towards where her parents were waiting. Kiera clung to his neck, her body shaking in fear. "I'm scared. I want Mama," she sobbed. He didn't say anything. Just then Scarlet and Elijah burst from the trees, having heard the sounds. Relieved to see a shaken but otherwise okay Kiera, Scarlet shifted, not caring who was around, taking Kiera into her arms and soothing the terrified child. Elijah growled, warning Aaron and Alejandro not to look. Alejandro mentally rolled his eyes. The man was too protective. He walked off ahead. He knew Raphael wouldn't stop harassing him to know what it was. Since these four had seen him, it was best he had a word with them before he left. He didn't give answer about anyone's questioning, but right now, he needed his identity to be kept secret. He had plans, but they would take time. They were now back at the villa and the rest of the children had been put to bed. The adults had got dressed and Scarlet had given Kiera a bath before settling her down with a cup of hot milk on the kitchen stool. Raphael now looked at them. He had just finished telling them how he had shifted at the age of 13. First, they had thought the premature shift was the reason for his odd form, but realized it just became more and more. The man was about 6'6", but his lichen form was well over 7 feet. He was faster, stronger and had a stronger sense of smell than an alpha werewolf. This comment made Elijah cast the man a frown. "So, in other words, he's a freak of nature," he remarked. "Freak of nature? Isn't that what your kid is?" Alejandro replied, taking out a cigarette and lighting it. "Not in front of kids, Alejandro," Raphael said, his words falling on deaf ears. Elijah growled at him, daring him to insult Kiera again. "It's the truth. A wolf who can't walk properly, doubt she'll ever be able to, and a pup who can't see in the dark? A invalid. Surprising, considering she has 2 alphas for parents." 2 growls tore through the room and Elijah lunged at Alejandro, his fist raised, but the younger man gripped his fist, not caring that Elijah's claws dug into his hands. "LM stating facts," Alejandro said, his eyes flashing as he stared into Elijah's darkened ones. "Back off." His command rolled off him and Elijah felt his wolf fight him. He gritted his teeth, wrenching his hand free. "At least she has the 2 of you to take care of her, because life's going for her. Get used to it. Scarlet, take Kiera to bed now," Elijah said. He didn't want her to hear this. Scarlet glared coldly at Alejandro before she lifted Kiera, who was staring wide-eyed, her young mind uncertain of exactly what was happening. "If you hadn't saved her, I'd kill you. Or die in the process." Alejandro replied coldly, smoking his cigarette. "I'm sorry on his behalf, Elijah. What was that thing out there?" Raphael asked, trying to defuse the situation. "Something that feeds on children or fetuses of werewolves. I had a feeling it wasn't rogues behind the brutal murders." Raphael looked down, feeling guilty. He had even thought his brother may have been behind those attacks. He looked away and Alejandro scoffed coldly. He knew what was going through his brother's mind. He didn't fully trust him, that or he thought he was a monster. Well, he was. "Well, I'll be out of here before morning, just need my phone charged." He didn't care what people thought of him. He'd do what he wanted and no one would stand in his way. Elijah entered the kids' room, seeing Scarlet caressing Kiara's hair. Liam was asleep on the other side of the bed. "Is she asleep?" he asked softly as he walked over, pulling Scarlet up and into his arms. "Yeah. Alejandro isn't wrong. She will be bullied and probably looked down on," Scarlet whispered, sadness filling her. When Kiara was barely 2, they had been attacked by rogues and she had her right foot almost bitten off. Her bones had been crushed beyond the ability of her healing and she now had to live with damage to her Achilles tendon for life. The guilt never left Elijah. It was his job to protect her no matter what, but he had failed her. "I'll protect her," Elijah said, his eyes flashing, his hold on Scarlet tightening. She cupped his face and kissed him softly. "I know you want to be the perfect dad, and you are, but protecting her from everything will only hurt her. In the long run, she will have to face the world and all it's going to bring her way. We need to make sure she's ready for it." They both looked at her and Elijah sighed. "You're right, Red. Let's get to bed," she replied, pulling away. She gave both her kids a soft kiss. Elijah did the same before they both took their leave and returned to their own room. It was hours later and Alejandro sat on the front doorstep, smoking his 4th cigarette. Lost in thought about the creature. Was it just a lone attack or were there more? Where had it come from? Something bigger was at work here, he could feel it. He heard quiet footsteps and turned, seeing Kiara walking down the steps. She kept using her left foot to step down, then lifting her right. He frowned as she looked up at him and walked a little faster down the stairs, stumbling on the bottom one. He shook his head, looking away. Didn't they know how to look after one child? Or was she just a disobedient brat? "Thank you for saving me from the monster," she said, stepping out of the house to stand in front of Alejandro. He looked down at her, for the first time paying attention to her large eyes. It was ironic that they looked so unique but were pretty useless. He looked out into the darkness. The child still staring at him. "Are you deaf?" He glanced at her, sharply glaring at her. "I'm not a loser like you, now get lost," he said coldly, his eyes flashing red. She only smiled and stepped closer. "When it was dark, I could see your eyes glowing," she said as if it was the most amazing thing ever. He tossed the cigarette to the floor. Did the kid not get a hint? Good for you, now get back to bed. I wanted to give you this. She now held out a red rose with a crumpled stem. He raised his eyebrow when she bravely took his hand and placed the flower into it, smiling happily. He frowned, even his niece and nephew stayed meters away from him whenever he saw them, which was rather rare. Go away. She ignored him now, placing her index fingers at the corner of his lips and pushing his face. He glared at her. What are you doing? He said, pushing her hands away. Stupid kid. I'm teaching you to smile. She said, giving him a huge one. He gave her a cold smirk in reply. Life's a nightmare, kid. The earlier you learn that, the better. He stood up. He didn't have the time or patience to waste with a pathetic weak pup. He grabbed his phone from the hallway charger and stepped outside. The little girl stepped inside. She looked a little upset at his words but still stood there silently. He glared at her, tossing the flower she had passed him onto the ground. Her eyes widened as she looked at it, her eyes stinging with tears of hurt. Her tears spilled down her cheeks when he stepped on it, crushing it. He glanced back at her from the door. If something so small had hurt her, then she wasn't going to survive this world. Maybe he should have let her die. It would have saved her from a lot of pain that she would inevitably have to face. He closed the door, turning away. He didn't really care anyway. He probably wouldn't ever see her again. Or so he thought. If only he knew how very wrong he was. Bonus. Winter had settled upon the town of Stratford-upon-Avon, blanketing it and its surroundings in a deep layer of powdery snow. In the woods not far from the town, was the home of the Blood Moon Pack. A large house stood at the edge of the frozen river, covered in some Christmas lights and surrounded by trees bare of leaves. A small layer of snow clung to the branches. Elijah stood by the window, watching his twins sneak down the path. They're off, hey! Scarlet said from where she was pouring some melted chocolate into a glass bowl. Yep, and I'm sure we both know where they're going, Elijah replied, an amused smirk on his lips. Like always, the twins loved to sneak away to their great-grandma Amelia's. They're on their way to yours. And this time they seem to have packed. Keep them for the night, Elijah mind-linked his great-aunt. Elle already knew that. Let me put on some tea? Aren't they too young for tea? Elijah asked. Oh, zip that pie hole of yours. I'm the one keeping them for the night, and they are pups, you useless oaf. Tea will do no harm. She snapped loudly. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Well, have fun, Daniel is watching them until they get to yours. Yes, yes, I know you want to get rid of me, she remarked, cutting the link before Elijah could even reply. Will she keep them? Scarlet asked, leaning on the counter and ing the spoon of shade, her cleavage on show temptingly. Yeah, all night. So how about we make the most of it? Elijah remarked, not missing the glint in his mate's eyes. He drew the blinds before walking over to his mate, who placed the spoon in the sink and carried the bowl to the kitchen island. Sounds like a plan. I think there's no need to make some brownies anymore, since the one who asked for them has gone. How about we put this chocolate to use? She asked, her eyes flashing silver as she dipped her finger in the bowl of melted chocolate. Elijah felt himself throb, his eyes darkening as he closed the gap between them. She slipped her finger into his mouth, letting him lick the chocolate off. Their eyes locked. The moment she slipped her finger out of his mouth, he grabbed the back of her hair, pushing her against the worktop, his lips crashing against hers in a hungry, passionate kiss. We sure can. He growled back through the link, his hands roaming her body as he tore her top off, lifting her onto the counter. Molten pleasure rushed through her veins, her desire for him growing with each passing second. Elijah! She murmured, tearing his shirt off, before running her hands down his chest. Tonight was indeed going to be one long, hot, passionate night. The two 6-year-olds trudged along in the cold weather, making their way to the house of the woman who would always give them some freshly baked treats. They were both clutching the bags they had packed for themselves. They didn't want to stay at home, there was something fun about Grandma Amy's and they wanted to spend the evening there. Hopefully, their parents won't notice they were missing. Are you sure Mama and Daddy won't realize we are gone? Kiera asked with a worried pout, her doe eyes filled with fear and concern. Liam shook his head. No, I told Daddy we were going to go to bed early. He replied confidently. Did Daddy believe you? Daddy or Mama always put us to bed. She replied skeptically. Of course, I told Daddy we are big now. Liam replied with a nod. Kiera nodded, although she still felt a little uncertain. It's getting dark, Liam. Kiera said softly as her brother held her hand firmly, not wanting her to trip or fall, and making sure to walk at a pace that was good for her. He knew how she couldn't see in the dark too. Don't worry, Kia, I'm here with you and I'm an alpha. I'll take care of you. You're not an alpha yet, Liam. Kiera replied with a pout, looking at her brother, who was a good half-head taller than her. I am still going to take care of you. He replied, kissing his sister's forehead. Come on, shall I carry you? No, I'm okay, silly. Look, there's Grandma Amy's house. She exclaimed excitedly. The twins hurried, hand in hand, Liam making sure his sister didn't stumble and fall. The warm glow from the cottage up ahead was so welcoming. The stream of smoke that billowed from the chimney promised warmth and comfort inside. The door opened before they even got to it. Amelia stood there, a small smile on her face. Ah, I was expecting the two of you. Come on in, I have put on some tea, cinnamon tea. Liam asked with excitement, sniffing the want that cold to come into my house. And a lot more. Now come on inside and shut the door. I don't want that cold to come into my house. Sorry, Grandma. Kiera said, hurrying inside. Amelia took her hand, helping her in as Liam quickly shut the door, feeling relieved they had made it and no one had spotted them. Not realizing that Daniel, who had followed them silently, now gave Amelia a small nod through the window before he walked off. The cottage smelt of cinnamon and baked goods, the twins inhaled deeply. Huge smiles crossed their lips, their mama was a good baker, but there was just something special about Grandma Amy's baked treats. So did you two tell your parents you are here? Amelia asked, looking down at the twins. Liam blinked smoothly and nodded, whilst Kiera looked guilty, her little heart racing in her chest. We did, Liam said confidently as he helped Kiera take her backpack off, before dusting her hair, getting rid of any stray snowflakes. You don't need to worry, Grandma, I am a big boy. Kiera smiled and nodded, knowing that her brother would always protect her. Amelia shook her head, boys. All the same, she left the twins to take their boots and coats off as she glimpsed inside her oven. Those cookies were almost done. Now, where had she put those triple chocolate muffins and cinnamon rolls she had made earlier? So let us have some tea and I will start on dinner. Now come and help me set the table. Kiera giggled as she hurried to help, whilst Liam pouted with a tilt of his head before he went and began getting the dishes out. Amelia said nothing, letting them decide what dishes to take to the table. That's how kids learn some independence, although she had no doubt that these two were independent enough, considering they came here all by themselves. Another 10 minutes went by. Liam had put some music on the radio, after twiddling with it for a bit. The boy was smart, selfless, and patient. Yet Amelia could see how that same selflessness could become a test for him in the future. Oh, how life was so unpredictable. She smiled slightly, as she looked out at the falling snow. Indeed, it was. Once the table was set, and the muffins, cookies, and rolls were placed in the middle with 3 mugs of steaming tea, they all took a seat around the table. Now why don't you both tell me, why didn't you tell your parents that you came here? Amelia asked. Kiera's eyes widened as she looked at Liam, who instantly put the cookie down. Both wondered how she had seen through their lie. I forced Kiera to come here, and I was the one who lied, he said quickly. Ah, ever the one to protect the rest. If only he realized I could see through his lies, it had indeed been Kiera's wish to come here. Amelia thought. The guilt in her eyes spoke louder than any words could. She raised an eyebrow. Oh? Well, I'm sure your father won't be happy with that. Liam hesitated. It wasn't Liam's fault, he only came because I said I wanted to, Kiera added, taking her brother's hand protectively. Now that's better. I prefer the truth. Amelia said, sipping her tea. Will you send us home? Kiera asked sadly. Don't you want us here? Liam added. Amelia scoffed. Now don't pull those puppy dog eyes on me. You two enjoy your treats, and I will go pop dinner in the oven. Then how about a little game? Grandma Amy, can you play that game with those cards? Kiera asked in excitement. Amelia paused, glancing back at the hopeful child. Very well, she said, hurrying to finish the task at hand. Before walking to her bedroom and opening a locked box, she took out a pile of cards. Oh, Grandma's fancy cards! Liam said, trotting back to the table having placed all the dishes to the side. Kiera was wiping the table and Amelia smiled at them. I love the teamwork you two have, and I hope no matter where life takes you, you will always be there for one another. She remarked. What do you mean? Kiera asked. I'm never leaving Liam. Yes, Kiera has to stay by my side. She is my best friend. I thought you said Damon was your best friend. Kiera asked with a sad pout. Because Raven said she is yours. Liam said, a faint blush coating his cheeks. She's so bossy. Well, you can be my special best friend. Kiera said, thinking how Raven and Liam were both special to her. Now sit down and let's start. Amelia said, mixing the cards before she placed 10 cards upside down. Kiera, you may start, choose 3. I love how Grandma Amy will tell us the future. Kiera exclaimed with delight as she quickly selected 3 cards and handed them to the elderly lady. Amelia chuckled. It's just a game, dear, nothing truly magical in it. I think there is. Kiera said excitedly. What does my future say? Amelia looked at the first card, masking the frown that threatened to cross her face. The card held a picture of a red eyes. What does the card say? Liam asked curiously. It's a wolf. Amelia said, showing them the card. No, it wasn't a wolf, it was a lichen, she thought. Oh, a wolf? Kiera asked with a tilt of her head. It's very ugly. Liam giggled, it's big and scary. Amelia turned the next card. This time her frown was clear on her face. A trial? Kiera would see hardship. You will have a test. Kiera stayed quiet, lost in thought as Amelia turned the final card. A smile finally crossed the woman's lips. And you will flourish, she stated. Flourish too? Kiera asked, confused. Yes, Amelia said, not explaining what she meant. She gazed down at the card, and her eyes twinkled. Kiera was indeed meant for great things. Now my turn, Liam said, a little impatient, his bright blue eyes glittering with anticipation. Of course. Amelia nodded, shuffling the cards. Flourish, Kiera murmured again before shaking her head, not understanding it at all. Amelia placed another set of cards down, and Liam was quick to move forward, pausing thoughtfully before he moved towards the furthest away. Unlike his sister, who had quickly picked 3 cards, he hesitated, thinking hard as if it would make a difference. Before slowly selecting his first card. Solemnly, he gave it to Amelia. Liam. Hurry up. Kiera pouted unhappily. I want to choose slowly, he stated, before selecting 2 more and handed them to Amelia. Of course, dearie. Now let's see what these have to say about you, she said, turning the first card. She raised an eyebrow. When you love deeply. She turned to the second card, and that very love will become a test for you, she thought, not wanting to say this out loud. What is it? Kiera asked. Liam will face a test, Amelia said after a moment. A test? Liam added. Yes. Amelia turned the final card and looked at it deeply. Of all the cards, this one? She looked at the boy before her. It couldn't be possible. What does it say? Kiera asked in a hushed whisper. Oh, I don't know the meaning of this one, Amelia said smoothly, about to return it to the pile when Liam took it from her quickly, staring deeply at the image on the card. He tilted his head, curiosity filling him. What did it mean? Before he could stare at it for much longer, Amelia snatched it from his hands. Okay, game over. How about you 2 go to my bedroom and start setting up the extra blankets for Liam on the sofa in there, she suggested. Okay, Kiera said. Liam nodded with excitement, staying at Grandma Amelia's meant movie night in bed. And there was no set bedtime. The 2 children ran off, Liam making sure to hold his sister's hand tightly as she stumbled in her rush. Once the children had left the room, Amelia turned the third card over in her hand, staring down at it deeply. Regardless of the future, she had faith in her family. No matter what was thrown their way, they would overcome it. Shaking her head, she shuffled the cards before slipping them away onto her bookshelf. It was just one reading, it meant nothing. Through the open bedroom door, she looked at Liam. Yes, it's surely a wrong reading. With that thought in mind, she got back to preparing dinner. Looking forward to spending time with the two special gems that were laughing and giggling in her bedroom. This winter night was indeed going to be lovely. The end. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.